These days, I have a very reliable drink of choice. Mezcal. Anything with mezcal in it. Or just plain mezcal. I've got a bias towards its smoky flavor and the way that combines with its sweet brightness. Over 70% of the world's mezcal comes from Oaxaca, Mexico. And so when a work trip took me there, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my one weekend off. Good morning! So I am extremely excited for today. Today is my kind of my only totally unplanned day off while in Oaxaca. And so I am going on a little adventure revolving around mezcal. Via Instagram, I got connected to Rambling Spirits. The team of Anna and Brooks live in Oaxaca, and they have a lot of personal relationships with the maestros of mezcal who live in the area. And so this gives me a closer and more intimate look at the process. While waiting for Anna and Brooks from Rambling Spirits to show up, I filled up on a big breakfast of mole and tortillas in anticipation of the big day ahead. Soon enough, they pulled up in front of the hotel, along with their trio of dogs. We drove into the countryside, along the famed Ruta de Mezcal, and my mezcal education had begun.
I enjoy it, yeah. That's probably my favorite liquor these days.
So agave in the local language is called maguey.
As we drove towards the hills, Anna and Brooks had already unpacked one of my biggest curiosities.
In Mexico,
the relationship
centuries,
between
the kind of identity of what tequila was driven by the American market.
Taking it and just defining it and then trying to sell that idea, but also
So what you might have heard is that tequila is technically a mezcal. So it's a bit like champagne to sparkling wine. It's regionally specific.
All different groups of people. So typically I tend to associate mezcal with a smokier flavor and tequila with a more tart one, but there are definitely smoky tequilas and tangy mezcals. Officially, the distinction has more to do with regions and agave species. Tequila can only be made from blue agave, and it comes from these 5 states, though the majority will be from Jalisco. Mezcal can be made from 30 plus different types of agave, and 8 states can produce mezcal, but most of it comes from right here in Oaxaca. But let's back things up a little bit. The story of mezcal begins in the earth, with agave.
You can see just these little sprouting ones. And sometimes they're called margollitos when they grow on the top of the quiote.
Agave are hardy, resilient plants. These have an incredible genetic diversity, and that allows people to make a wide variety of spirits. Outside of human cultivation, they'd often grow on rocks or on the sides of cliffs. When people began farming them, planting in rows, they used what's known as a milpas system.
So typically a milpa, so that's amaranth, bean, corn or squash. And that's just something to grow together, agave or not.
This method involved interspersing agave plants among other crops for the shared benefits of preventing disease and keeping that from spreading among members of the same species.
We talked about it, now is planting time.
Agave farming is not immune to the same industrialization and monocropping that's impacted most agriculture. But the emphasis placed on collaboration by the maestros of mezcal and the tradition helps keep things in check. One thing I'm especially impressed with now is the life cycle of an agave plant. Some will live for only 6 to 8 years, but others will go for generations. Most will probably settle in from 10 to 12 years. They only flower once in their lifetime. Every time you see one blooming, you can note that this is maybe a once-in-a-decade happening, if that. And that's kind of how you know they're ready to harvest, but not quite. What they'll do is they'll chop off the flower portion. They call the process castrating it, which biologically actually makes sense, although that sounds intense. And leave it for a few months, maybe up to a year, while the agave plant itself just consolidates and gets full of sugar. Okay, that was almost accurate. The one part that I got wrong is that an agave flower will be cut long before it looks like that. You'll cut it right when it looks kind of like an asparagus tip, and actually, genetically, they are related to asparagus. So this early?
Yeah. I would say maybe another foot and then cut it down to like there.
Of course, this means it won't flower, and so an agave can either become a parent or it can become mezcal. With that basic knowledge, it was time to head to our first tasting. En route, I learned some more about the human history of mezcal and how Zapotec, Mixtec, and Filipino people contributed to its origins. Wait, Filipino? We'll get to that in a sec, but first let's talk about the Mexican indigenous groups. Now, the Spanish brought over the style of distillation that we're more familiar with, the type that we've been seeing. But before that, the Zapotec, the Mixtec, the Mitla, Aztecs, they all had their own style of fermenting the liquid of the agave, and this produced a kombucha-like drink known as pulque. Back home in San Diego, my favorite spot to get mezcal is called Cantina Mayahuel, and I was about to learn the origin of its name. Mayahuel was a goddess, and Anna shared with me her story using her newest tattoo.
So rabbits and hares are often part of like myths and stories about agave because of the Mayahuel story. Mayahuel is the goddess of fertility in agave, was basically kept prisoner by her evil grandmother.
That would be Zitzimitl, goddess of the night sky, who every now and then would come to Earth and devour human beings. But now Mayahuel just so happened to strike the fancy of perhaps the most famous Aztec deity, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah, so Quetzalcoatl fell in love with Mayahuel, and the grandmother was like, nah, not happening. So
Quetzalcoatl and Mayahuel do what many others in their situation have done. They run away together. And in their favor, Quetzalcoatl just so happens to be the god of wind and air. But Grandma's also pretty determined.
Hello, darkness, my old friends. Quetzalcoatl knows that she's looking for them, so he turns Mayahuel into a tree.
This didn't really stop Grandma.
So the grandmother strikes the tree with a lightning bolt. She's so angry, and the lightning bolt destroys the tree and kills Mayahuel. And Quetzalcoatl is broken-hearted. And he takes the shards of the tree and scatters them all over Mexico. And wherever a shard fell, the agave plant grew.
To go from agave to mezcal, the most important part is the core of the plant, the piña. Mezcaleros will cut away the leaves until we're left with the heart of the plant. And then they're cooked in an open pit oven like this.
A pit oven, or sometimes known as a conical oven. The way that it gets set is you have this big pit, you put your fire.
Here we have a few cooked agave plants. A quick note that this stuff is really easy to repurpose.
Like reusing everything is a big part of mezcal as well.
¿Este estarín todo? Sí. ¿Es posible probar un poquito?
So here's a style of mezcal I've never had before. Eating it raw, right off the agave leaf. Okay, so you just chew on this, right?
Yeah, but just suck the sugars.
Oh, wow.
You don't want to swallow the fibers.
I think this tastes really good.
Delicious.
It's like a treat on its own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They used to sell it in the markets as a treat for kids.
This tastes almost like a really smoky tamarind candy.
Yeah. I mean, that tamarind flavor is so popular here as well.
Now, there are 3 levels of certification for mezcal: industrial, artisanal, and ancestral. And the spot we were at specialized in the latter. Sort of.
My ancestral is more from like 4.5 hours away in the mountains and stuff like that. So this family decided they wanted to experiment and make one in more or less the vibe of ancestral. Typically, you are meant to be using only things that predate the conquest.
Once the pines are harvested and roasted, the next step is to extract as much of the sweet liquid out of them as possible. Tamp it down,
Yeah.
knock the juices out.
Another reason you do small batches.
Right.
With how laborious of a process this is, it shouldn't be much of a surprise that people figured out a much more efficient way to do things.
The original rock and roll.
Once that's done, it's time to let the liquid ferment.
There's a bigger pot in here, so that's what you put everything into. Hot water is going to be pouring out, cold water is going in. It's the cold water, and then recondenses down, and then drips into, and then comes out here. You'll take all that bagasso out, and then you'll use that for the next cook.
Yeah, so ancestral is also sometimes known as a Filipino style.
As it turns out, the style was used and popularized by a lot of enslaved Filipinos who were brought over to Mexico and who often worked in the very early distilleries.
This style is found, or something very similar is found in the Philippines, and a lot of Filipino slaves were brought here with the Spanish.
Yeah, really.
And so some historians think that, and anthropologists
That's
think
where
that
it came
that's
from.
where it came from.
I gotta admit, that was not at all a discovery I was expecting. Of course, that comes from a very awful and regrettable and horrific part of history, right? But there's also something about me being here right now and the fact that this is a drink that I have as kind of a luxury. That's kind of like reclaiming space. And I haven't put all these pieces together yet, and I'm not sure I'm going to anytime soon, but it's something. Back at the bar, it was time to taste the fruits of our labor. Well, mostly the maestro's labor, but technically I contributed. Imagine having the skills of a farmer, a brewer, a bartender, and a business person. I suppose that's why they're called maestros. And we're on our way to visit Maestro Jose. Here's the thing about Jose. This guy has the best at-home bar I've ever seen.
It's pretty cool. You should check out behind.
So this is the inside of Jose's bar. ¿Cuántos litros?
500.
500.
Yeah.
This guy is completely ready for the apocalypse. In addition to letting me take a peek at his special stash, he also introduced me to Habali.
So I was telling you with the Habali, the second distillation, because you have to do it 3 times. So you can tell this is kind of like yellow and foamy.
There's been such a range between the different tastes we've had, just
Absolutely,
at the first
man.
3 spots.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what's so exciting about the
factors,
category.
like
So something that's very typical in the mezcal world is something called pechuga, where you add fruits and nuts and spices into the second distillation. Literally just put them all in with the liquid in the second, and then you'll hang a turkey breast or a rabbit breast or something, a raw one, in the top of the still. It doesn't touch the liquid, it just hangs there. And then as the evaporation part
You're
of the
trying
session,
to get the flavors into the meat.
yeah, not into the meat.
Or
The
is it the
flavors
other way?
come. The flavors come through into the spirit, but the meat is essentially a filter. One of the things we tried literally a week ago, 10 days ago, was someone doing it with thick bacon. I don't know. So it's an experiment.
Yeah.
there's been Iberico
Yeah.
Pechuga before by Del Maguey, but it was a short
And
one.
That's a very
and that did have some.
luxurious filter.
Exactly. It was expensive.
So something you can see here is just such a good example of a really high quality mezcal. The pearls just sit and just stay really slowly a good quality mezcal has good pearls. It's like a good wine has good legs. And Maestro was saying that one had been growing outside the front of his family's palenque for since he was 10 or something. Suddenly flowers, and it's oh my god, now I have to use this in mezcal, and it's kind of like harvesting your friend or your neighbor. So there's so much, I don't know,
You've
respect
known it your whole life.
everything.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the good conversation. Perhaps it was just the mezcal, but I didn't notice when Jose slipped away. I did notice when he and his wife returned with something else for us to try. The best damn hot cocoa of my life.
All right, correct me if I say anything wrong. So we have a traditional Oaxacan chocolate here, right?
Uh-huh.
And the foam is the
It's
premier
key.
ensemble piece.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you said that they, I don't know, a lot of the flavor is just trapped in the foam, and that's kind of what the...
Yeah, it was unique about, I'd say, a Oaxacan hot chocolate.
This is really good. This feels like a mousse on top of
I actually hate. It's not sweet. I hate sweet things, but I'm fucking loving it.
Right? Yeah,
I like the cold foam.
Before heading to our next stop, we had a good look at some of Jose's distilling equipment. Unlike our earlier spot, he took to copper pots and pipes rather than the bamboo and clay. I also got a taste of puntas. If the cocoa was a break from the alcohol, the puntas signaled the end of halftime.
So these are the heads, the first parts of the distillation, of the second distillation, called puntas, and they're very high in alcohol and delicious.
¿Cuántos grados piensas son los?
Put some hair on your nuts.
160?
It was 80%.
Yeah.
That was intense. And now it was probably a great time to try something milder, but monumental in the history of mezcal. Pulque.
Hola.
Es posible probar un poquito
también el buque y también ver el libro.
Bueno,
Gracias.
but in the case of this particular variety, it's called pulquero. It doesn't happen like that, and you can actually drink the liquid straight from the plant. But it's very specific to this one. Arauqueño is probably the closest. That was harvested this morning, probably about like 7 a.m.
This was just this morning.
Yeah.
Ah.
And then this is pulque, so that's naturally fermented over ¿cuántos días?
3 días.
3 days in this case. Up to about 5 days it's still drinkable, but it's just gradually becoming more of a vinegar and then you don't want to drink it.
The day's adventure had already been full, so where would we go next? Church.
Es muy delgado y yeah, so super steep and
All right, we made it to the top of the tower. So clearly I've had a reasonable amount of mezcal because I was still allowed and able to make it to the top of El Torre. You can see over the entire village. Look at that. So I take it you can't take just anybody up top here after all the mezcal tasting.
it's not very often that I'm up here. I don't want to be responsible for like not keeping my eye on everybody, and when people are just kind of excited on holiday, I think the guard goes down and
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
From the mezcal to the church architecture, Oaxaca is an artist's city. But Oaxacan artists aren't the brooding individualists of Western Europe and the New World. This art draws from a connection to community, ancestry, and tradition. And exploring this would be incomplete without taking a deep dive into Oaxacan textiles. Of course, this stop also still includes some welcome mezcal.
We are focused on all on weaving, so everything that you see here is weaving made out of wool. So everything is done by us.
So we just got a demo on how the dyes are made to make works like this.
These are the basic materials that we use. So one of the very important colors that we carry is the cochineal. This is an insect that grows on the cactus pad, and this is ground on a metate like this. This is how we get the different reds. This front and the back is also dyed, so the back is cotton. Another plant that we use is the indigo. In this case, everything is used to dye. So this is all boiled for the beige colors.
Oh, that's just moss.
Just moss, yes. And this is boiled.
for this kind of color.
Yeah, that tone.
So if you're keeping score at home, red comes from a bug, blue from indigo, beige from moss, and yellow from marigold. The original CMYK.
Just a little bit of cochineal. Kind of a pinkish color here.
Before leaving, I got to see the couple in action.
Alright, so we made it to some agave fields. The car ride here, and probably a lot of the mezcal from earlier was putting me to sleep. So I was feeling extremely peaceful, and this seems to fit the mood.
So we went to Diansu, a trail that led between agave fields to Zapotec ruins where the dogs could run.
Alright, we reached the top, found some Zapotec ruins.
Here's where our day's adventure finished. At the top of the Zapotec ruins, an ancient stadium with one last taste of chocolate-infused mezcal, of course. All these crafts and traditions are as old as these ruins, but they remain alive and well today.
One of the things that really appealed to me was like how kind of...
So after all that mezcal tasting, I had to pick up something to sop it all up, you know? Anyway, thank you so much to Rambling Spirits. Check them out on social media if you ever are interested in booking a tour in Oaxaca and want to go beyond kind of the big touristy experience and get to know mezcal more intimately through the maestros and the farmers who make it. Go check out their Instagram page. Also, this is just the start of stuff I have from Oaxaca. I'm on a big adventure right now, so I can't wait to share more stuff with you. And in the meantime, like, subscribe, do the good stuff, and I'll see you soon.